What am I doing here? Where am I? What's going on? Oh, wait, yeah, I'm doing this live stream on Saturday morning. How y'all doing out there in internet land? My name is Brian Trippett. I am the Front Porch Conservative. Welcome, as always, to Front Porch Brunch, our weekly gathering as we get together, hang out on a Saturday morning, talk about some items in the news, give our opinion about it, and otherwise have a real good time in the process. We are on YouTube, we are on Rumble, we are on Twitter, so if you haven't done it yet, send out a tweet, a Gettr, a Gab, a Truth Social, a Facebook post, whatever it is that you do or can do out there to help this going little concern become a going big concern and get as many people in the room as is possible. Again, my name is Brian Trippett. I am the Front Porch Conservative. Glad to have you here for Front Porch Brunch. And we will gab for a little while about what goes on in the world. So we'll start off the volume on the music, settle into the chair. Been a crazy morning already for me, but that's neither here nor there. So how are you guys doing? Let's see who is out here so far. So many happenings. 4.5 hours. Oh my goodness, woman, are you trying to get me killed? Good Lord. But we're glad that I don't know about 4.5 hours. We're going to be here for a good little while talking about some things going on in the news. We're glad to have you. Looks like we got a nice little crowd settling in on YouTube or on Rumble already. So feel free to drop your comments in chat. Let's hear from you. Let's find out what you're thinking, what you know, what you don't know, what you'll lie about, what you won't lie about, and see if we can't solve some of the world's problems, or at least give our opinion about what ought to happen to the world's problems anyway. So good to have you here this morning. Good morning, young lady. We're glad to have you here. Glad to see you. Hope everything is well up there in the People's Republic of Lamont, or I'm sorry, the state of Connecticut. I apologize. Yeah, I'm in one of those moods this morning. I don't know how you describe the mood I'm in, but anyway, yeah, we're going to talk about some items in the news. Got some congressional news to talk about. Got an interesting article about National Public Radio. Now, normally you wouldn't think this would be the sort of thing that we talk about here, but it does bring up some very interesting stuff, and I want to get into it. Also, we are apparently on the edge of World War III. If you listen to Joe Biden, we'll get into that this morning. So there's that. And then we got a few items for what we call Hodgepodge stew. Those things in the news that aren't necessarily above the fold, but they're very interesting to be talking about. And one of them we're going to get into is the continued fallout over Donald Trump's position on the question of abortion and how it ought to be handled. And the funny thing about it is the fallout isn't necessarily coming from the Democrats. It's coming from the pro-life movement. And we'll get into that this morning. So I hope everybody's doing real well. Good morning, my dear. She's already mixing the drinks. Glad to have you here. I did not see that, but I'm not surprised. And we'll get this. I tell you what, this guy, this whistleblower at NPR wrote a really interesting article. We're going to get into it here in a little bit. But I want to start first with some of what's happened in the past, let's call it 48 to 96 hours. For those of you who follow my channel on a fairly regular basis, and if you're not following my channel on a regular basis, what the heck's the matter with you? You guys will know that I did a video where the following thumbnail was used: House votes down FISA renewal. And this was as of Wednesday night, or Wednesday, I should say, when all this went down. And the House of Representatives voted down the consideration of even bringing FISA renewal to the floor. Okay. And it was a pretty, this was really interesting. This doesn't happen too often, but normally what happens is there's a vote on the House rule. In other words, how the bill will be handled, then you go and vote on the bill. Well, the members of the Freedom Caucus mostly, and the entirety of the Democrat caucus wouldn't even vote on the rule. They wouldn't even let the thing come to a vote. Okay. Well, I didn't really understand well, I shouldn't say totally, but I didn't quite understand the why. I mean, a lot of things have been conjectured. Well, Donald Trump told them to vote against it, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. Well, there's a bit more to it than that. So I take you to the Twitter page of a young lady named Elizabeth Goitein, who is the co-director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. And she had and I got to thank Glenn Greenwald for turning me on to this. She had a very lengthy post on Twitter which explained exactly what went down, which caused the House Republicans to say, not just no, hell no, we ain't voting for this thing. Maybe not the House Republicans, but a significant number of them that, in concert with the Democrats, explains why this thing went down to defeat. So let's get into this. Now, this is about halfway through, a little over halfway through her tweet thread. But rather than bring up these compromise bills to the floor, Speaker Johnson chose to go with FISA, a bill favored by the intelligence community that masquerades as reformed, but is carefully designed to preserve the status quo when it comes to backdoor searches. Reformers still agreed to go along with this, as long as they could offer amendments to close the backdoor search and data broker loopholes. But there was a little too much democracy for intelligence community members, and they threatened to block the vote. So this time, Speaker Johnson edited FISA to ensure that the data broker amendment would be ruled non-germane, killing one of the reformers' two key amendments while allowing the Intel Committee members to offer 3 amendments to dramatically expand surveillance. That was the last straw. Even though the majority party traditionally votes in favor of the rule, nearly 20 House Republicans crossed the aisle to vote against it, dooming tomorrow's FISA vote. Many reporters are suggesting that these members voted no because Trump told them in a social media post that morning. That take ignores these members' strong and consistent support for reform over the year. To those who've been following Section 702, today's vote was no surprise. It was a predictable response not to Trump, but to Speaker Johnson's decision to roll the committee of jurisdiction, which in this case is judiciary, and block reforms demanded by members and by the American people. The message is clear. If the intelligence community want the government to continue surveilling and collecting foreign communications under Section 702, they must end their insistence on allowing the government to conduct warrantless searches for American communications. Okay, let's get into this. I'm not familiar with, prior to this, Elizabeth Goitein's coverage of national security matters, privacy matters, etc. And like I said, I've got to give a hat tip to Glenn Greenwald for pointing me in this lady's direction. But she's definitely now on my list of people that I follow on Twitter. If for nothing else, I want to get her take on this stuff going forward. Always good to have resources that are not necessarily out of mainstream media. But what it sounds like happened prior to Wednesday was Johnson tells the members of the Freedom Caucus, hey, we're going to do this and this and this and this. Well, he stacks the deck, so to speak. And to go back to what she wrote a little bit earlier in that thread, he edited the FISA, which was going to be the reform bill, by the way, to ensure that the data broker amendment would be ruled non-germane, killing one of the reformers' 2 key amendments. There's 2 things primarily that people who wanted to reform Section 702 of FISA wanted. Number 1, a warrant requirement. If you're going to, surveil Americans, you better have a warrant, and you better be able to have a very good justification to do it to get that warrant. Number 1. Number 2, data collection. A lot of people are swept up into Section 702 FISA issues, not even realizing it. The government is looking at data, purchases, where you go online, etc., and by hook and crook are basically looking at what you're looking at. Okay, they want that stopped. Johnson wouldn't even allow for that. So finally, on Wednesday, when it was realized what Johnson had done, they were like, nope, forget it. You're not even going to bring this bill to the floor. And it was a victory, very enjoyable, but unfortunately short-lived, because yesterday we have this. House approves contentious FISA bill in a bipartisan vote. Article by Rebecca Bache and Michael Schnell of thehill.com, we have the following. The House, in a bipartisan vote, reauthorized the nation's warrantless surveillance powers on Friday, approving the program for another 2 years, even as lawmakers narrowly declined to attach an amendment that would require a warrant for some searches. The chamber cleared the bill, which will extend and reform Section 702 of FISA, on a 273-147 vote. Well, I don't see what reforms are in there, but okay, I'll give you that language. Congress is staring down an April 19 deadline to reauthorize the spying powers. Consideration of the FISA legislation made for a dramatic scene on the House floor Friday. Minutes before final passage, the chamber voted down an amendment 212 to 212 that would have added a warrant requirement for American data swept up in foreign surveillance. In the House, a tie loses. That amendment, led by Andy Biggs, Republican of Arizona, had emerged as a central disagreement in the FISA debate, pitting privacy hawks on the Judiciary Committee, who were in favor of the provision, against members of the Intelligence Committee in the White House who opposed it. Approval of the amendment would have raised serious questions about FISA bill's fate in the Senate and the White House. Then, as Representative Jake Ellzey, Republican of Texas, who was presiding over the chamber, gavelled out the vote, Representative Anna Paulina Luna yelled out, "I object." Moments later, Laurel Lee, Republican of Florida, sponsor of the legislation, offered a motion to reconsider. Mike Turner then offered a motion to table the motion to reconsider. Now, let's back up here for a second. And good morning to you, U-Haul. Glad to see it. Basically, what Anna Paulina Luna did was make a motion to what's called objection to consideration. In other words, we need to reconsider this. Turner made a motion to table her motion to reconsider. In simpler language, Anna Paulina Luna says, hey, I think we need to vote on this again. Turner's trying to prevent that from happening. And what it's going to do is force the House to come back in on Monday and vote on this one more time. Now, will it necessarily change what's going to happen here? Don't know. I doubt it. I think this thing is headed to the Senate as currently constituted, which is a crying shame. There is one thing this bill got out of it, and I'm going to talk about it here in a minute, and I don't like it. Now, Republicans are out there saying, oh, this is a reform. No, it's not. And I'll explain why. But let's get back to the article. The vote on the motion to table the motion to reconsider was postponed to a later date. The FISA bill will be unable to move to the Senate until that happens, even though it passed through the House. Passage of the FISA legislation nonetheless marks a win for Speaker Mike Johnson, who had struggled for months to facilitate compromise among two warring factions on the controversial topic of reauthorizing the U.S.'s warrantless surveillance authority. Well, is this really a victory? They still get to spy on you and me without a warrant, or without presenting to a judge good justification why they ought to issue a warrant. All right, let's get into some of this. Everybody is saying that this is somehow a victory. I disagree with that. And the victory that they're claiming is, well, we've changed FISA so that it goes from a 5-year renewal to a 2-year renewal. My response to that is big whoopty. I don't care. So basically, we're going from a situation where every 5 years you have to come back and ask permission to spy on the American people absent a warrant versus a 2-year situation where you have to come back and ask for authorization to spy on the American people without a warrant. Where's the victory in this? You're still spying on the American people without a warrant. I mean, the only thing Republicans are doing, and I do not like this, I have never liked this as a legislative tactic, is, I mean, this is a modified version of kick the can down the road. Well, I don't want to deal with it, and if it passes, well, and the Senate agrees with us and Biden signs it, well, in 2 years, Trump may get to deal with it. I do not like that at all. I do not like the idea of kick the can down the road and let some other politician deal with it. No, you can deal with it right now. You can vote this violation of my Fourth Amendment rights straight down the toilet. There's no victory in this. I'm sorry, there's not. The government gets to spy on me without a warrant if they so choose to do so. Where's the victory? Where is the victory, I ask you? Over on Rumble, Zippy says, crawls out of bed and flops down. DC is a bizarre world. Trump should get a pen out and a phone and end FISA, LOL. Well, I don't necessarily disagree with you. Yeah, and we don't vote for can kickers. We're actually voting for leaders. Now, I get that there are people inside the Republican caucus, like Mike Turner of Ohio, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who he's all for this thing. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I thought political leaders are here to preserve the rights guaranteed to the American citizenry and their freedoms under the Constitution. You swore an oath to that effect. I think I remember something to that end. I will faithfully preserve and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, the worst part is the spying on us isn't even being done by somebody foreign. It's being done by our own government. Again, I ask the question, where's the victory in this? Now, Trump, for his part, did have a take on this. And I'm sorry, I disagree with Trump on this. Folks, do me a favor, check this out. This runs about 43 seconds.
Go ahead, please.
Do you support the House's FISA bill that was passed this morning?
Which one?
The FISA bill. And did you talk to any?
Well, I'm not a big fan of FISA. I looked at it and I studied it and I know it probably better than anybody. They spied on my campaign. You do know that, right? And they did lots of other bad things. I'm not a big fan of FISA, but I told everybody, I said, do what you want. They put a lot of checks and balances on, and I guess it's down to 2 years now, so that it would come due in the early part of my administration.
Now, see, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm supporting President Trump for election, but I can't agree with him on this. You're working from the assumption you're going to be reelected, which I think, okay, there's a good chance that could happen, but that's not the point. If you know in your heart of hearts this is wrong, okay? If you know in your heart of hearts it's wrong, then send a bill over to the Senate with the strongest possible provisions to protect the privacy of the American citizenry as you possibly can, and make the Democrats vote against it. Put them on the record. Put the heat under them and make them vote against it. I mean, look, if you're doing this from a tactical standpoint, trying to figure out how to make your political opponent sweat the most, the simplest way to do it is pass the strongest possible bill you can and force them to have to defend the position that allowing the intelligence agencies to surveil the American people without a warrant is justified. Make the Democrats do it. Make the defenders of the deep state do it. Make them go to the floor of the Senate. Make the President of the United States, Joe Biden, get in front of a microphone and explain to the American people why it is that this is such a good idea. It's such a good idea to let our intelligence agencies, the NSA, FBI, whoever it may be, whatever three-letter agency in the alphabet soup you want to talk about, make them justify how this is even right. I do not like this at all. I'm sorry. I don't care if it's Donald Trump or it's Mike Johnson or anybody else. This idea of, well, we'll kick it down the road. Okay, yeah, we know it's bad, but we'll get another bite at the apple in 2 years. No, kill it right now. Kill it right now. Either kill it outright or put the protections in that guarantee my Fourth Amendment liberties. And if you're not going to do that, then what the hell are we even talking about here? I mean, look, I love Donald Trump, love him to death. I respect Mike Johnson. I can't agree with either one of them on this. I just can't. I mean, I'm going to call it out. I do not like how this has gone down. You know, trying to dangle this 2-year reauthorization in front of somebody like me, I ain't buying it. And I'm not sitting here telling you that I'm probably the best, person in the world to, on these subjects, but I know I can smell it. I can smell the BS coming off of this, at least to me. Now, mate, and if you disagree with me, that's perfectly fine. But where I come down on this, no, absolutely not. This is no bueno. No bueno. Absolutely not. No. But here's where we are. Now, they'll vote on this thing Monday on the motion to table the reconsider. And odds are after Monday it will go over to the Senate. Now, I do think that this is not done yet. And I'll tell you why. Because Thomas Massie, one of my favorites out of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and just one of my favorite congressmen in general, although he does stuff that makes me crazy sometimes, brought up a very good point. And that is, knowing the U.S. Senate, they're going to change the language of the House passed bill. They're going to put some provisions in that the House didn't even consider, which means this is going to come back over, and people like Andy Biggs and Gosar and Gates and, Boebert, my future ex-wife, she just doesn't know it yet, they're going to get another crack at this thing. Maybe this fight's not done. We'll see. We will see. Well, if you're passing out mimosas, I'm just saying. I'm working on a water right now, but I might need something stronger later on. But anyway. So yeah, that's what's going on with the FISA reouster. Now, that little press conference down at Mar-a-Lago was any number of different things. They were also introducing a bill, or Johnson was talking about, and I haven't got the clip pulled up for it. A bill will soon be introduced in the House that requires proof of citizenship before you get to vote. Okay, that's a good idea. Will it pass the Senate? Will Joe Biden sign it? Of course not. That's not the point. But it does make your political opponent dance. I like the idea. But also in that press conference after they introduced the bill, Trump asks if there are any questions. Well, of course, the press poses one to him. And have you ever been in one of those situations where you've got to say something nice about somebody when you may not really want to? There's an old joke I heard one time where joke goes like this. There's a woman in town who cannot say an unkind word about anybody. There's a man in town who is the meanest, orneriest cuss you've ever heard of, right? The man dies. The woman goes to the visitation. And everybody is wondering, what in the world could she possibly say about this man, of which no one has anything good to say because he was so mean throughout all of his life? So as the woman walks up to the casket and looks down on him, she says, "My, doesn't he look nice laying in the casket?" Folks, I'm here all week. Try the veal. But you get my point. Have you ever been in one of those situations where you've got to say something nice, but you're just gritting your teeth doing it. Well, this is what I kind of feel like Donald Trump was doing at Mar-a-Lago yesterday. I want to take you to a headline from thehill.com. Trump backs Johnson amid green ouster threat. Quote, he's doing a very good job. Article written by Michael Schnell. We have the following. Former President Trump threw his support behind Speaker Mike Johnson on Friday as Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of Trump's closest allies on Capitol Hill, threatened to force a vote on ousting the House leader. Asked during a press conference at Mar-a-Lago if he supports Greene's motion to vacate, Trump, while standing beside Johnson, said the speaker is doing a very good job. Quote, we're getting along very well with the speaker, and I get along very well with Marjorie. We have a speaker who was voted in, and it was a complicated process. It's not an easy situation for any speaker. I think he's doing a very good job. He's doing about as good as you're going to do, and I'm sure that Marjorie understands that. She's a very good friend of mine, and I know she has a lot of respect for the speaker. Earlier in the joint appearance, Trump said Johnson's doing a really good job under very tough circumstances. I stand with the speaker. We've had a very good relationship. Now, this is one of those moments. It's like I said, I mean, I am obviously not in the mind of Donald Trump, okay? I cannot tell you from one moment to the next what he's thinking. I kind of feel like Bob Uecker in Major League. The manager makes a move and it's like, I don't know what the hell he's thinking. You know, and that's kind of what I see Trump do something. I'm like, what? It's one of those things. Yeah, it's a between the lines. Yeah, that's probably the best way to view that comment. And I can almost understand why Trump's even saying it, because if you think about it, and let me preface what I'm about to say next with this. Do not mistake what I'm about to say next with letting Mike Johnson off the hook for anything, okay? He has been, from my perspective, very disappointing as a Speaker of the House. And also from the perspective of what I was hoping would be really good conservative leadership holding the gavel. Okay. So I'm not letting him off the hook for any of that. But on the other hand, Mike Johnson is in the most wretched position possible. He has a razor thin, and I mean razor thin, majority in the House that's barely hanging on by a thread. He's got a caucus that is divided, I won't say down the middle, but kind of close. You've got a very sizable conservative, America First, MAGA kind of a group led by the likes of Gates and Boebert and Andy Biggs and Gosar and Byron Donalds and MTG and all that bunch. And on the other hand, you've got, the sizable majority of the GOP caucus, which is old school establishment, in some cases, rhino Republicans that are all about the institution. They're all about, protecting their turf. They don't want to rock the boat. Okay, I'll make deals with Democrats if I can have some scraps off the table, whatever. Okay. And that is miserable to have to try to negotiate. Even if your instincts are with, Gates and Boebert and all the rest of them over here on the, America First MAGA side of the caucus, you've got to get stuff through, and you can't do it because of this old fuddy-duddy, old fart bunch over here on the other side. That said, I still stand by my belief. I think Mike Johnson could have done a lot of things better. But then again, I can understand the spot that he's in. So in that context, I understand, I think, why Trump is saying what he's saying. I will add this caveat. if Donald Trump wins in November, and if the Republicans retain the House, and that's a big if, okay? I don't know how secure Mike Johnson's job is, okay? I mean, I don't know if we're going to be heading for 18 ballots to determine the next Speaker of the next Congress, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if there was a serious move made to get Johnson out of the speakership, and if Trump weren't quietly behind it. Now, that part I could be wrong about. Maybe Trump would like to have Mike Johnson as the Speaker in the next Congress. I don't know. But it wouldn't surprise me terribly if I saw a bunch of House Republicans put up an alternative candidate and we go through something similar to what Kevin McCarthy went through in January 23. So, we'll see how all this shakes out. And, we'll just see how it all goes. Over on Rumble, Zippy says, politicians in America are nobles who are separate from the law, and the law is made of whims and well wishes of the tyrants. Zippy, I'm glad you said that, and I'll tell you why. There's a lot of reasons I dislike this FISA reauthorization that just passed out of the House on Friday. But did you know they've got a carve out in there that says, and this is what I've heard several different Congress people say, that Section 702 does not apply to members of Congress? I mean, yeah. Yeah, basically, the national security apparatus can spy on you and I absent a warrant, but you try to do that to a member of Congress. Oh no, you better have your ducks in a row and your I's dotted and your T's crossed. That's right. Yep, exactly. There's a carve out for the members of Congress on that provision. Rules for thee, but not for me. Yeah, and this is my wonder too. This is really my concern as well. Who's not compromised up there? I don't know. I really don't. It's just, it makes you sad. It really does. It really does. So we have that little item in the news. Now let's get to something that at least for me, and hopefully for you as well, that's very, very telling and extremely interesting. And I think it's worth a discussion. And I figured Brunch was probably the best place to get into this. But before we do, quick little commercial. It is 5 minutes after 11 on Saturday morning. My name is Brian Trippett. I am the Front Porch Conservative. We are on YouTube, we're on Rumble, we are on Twitter, and we are here for Front Porch Brunch, which is our weekly review of items in the news. So if you haven't done it yet and you're not a subscriber to my channels on YouTube and Rumble, please give me a sub. I genuinely appreciate it. Also, please hit the bell for notifications, send out the word, share it around. I'd like to see this thing grow and it has in the past year. It's grown quite a bit, and I really want to see it get bigger and better and have more people. We make it more fun and bring all kinds of people to the table. So we're glad to have you. Glad to have you here. So thanks for all of that. And so yeah, let's get. Okay, so you're both liquid and solid. Okay, that's good to know. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. I know some of you have, but for those of you who are watching this now live and will be watching it later, and you will, something happened from inside NPR that has absolutely turned the legacy media on its ear and has got them all, all flustered and navel gazing and having group meetings and, going to see their local shrink, whatever. And it's extraordinary what's happened. Now, the term was used a little bit earlier, whistleblower. And I don't think the term is wrong, but I'm not sure it's totally accurate either. What happened was somebody inside NPR wrote a piece that when it got published is absolutely reverberating all throughout the legacy media. The irony of it is the person writing the piece, offering the criticisms of NPR, is a bona fide liberal. You heard me. A lib is ratting out all of his colleagues over at NPR. Let's start with the New York Times, then we're going to get into this. NPR in turmoil after it is accused of liberal bias. And in more interesting news, water is wet. But let's go back to the article. An essay from an editor at the broadcaster has generated a firestorm of criticism about the network on social media, especially among conservatives. Article written by Benjamin Mullen and Katie Robertson. We have the following. NPR is facing both internal tumult and a fusillade of attacks by prominent conservatives this week after a senior editor publicly claimed the broadcaster had allowed liberal bias to affect its coverage, risking its trust with audiences. Yuri Berliner, a senior business editor who's worked at NPR for 25 years, wrote an essay published Tuesday by the Free Press, a popular Substack publication, quote, that people at every level of NPR have comfortably coalesced around the progressive worldview. Ooh. Ouch. You can feel my fingers are burning. I feel the hair that's left on my head singeing. I tell you what, there's heat coming off of that comment. But what exactly did he say? All right, let's get into this. Yuri Berliner is a 25-year man at NPR, been there forever. And like the article, the New York Times said, he wrote an article that was published at the Free Press, which, by the way, New York Times, don't call it a popular Substack account. That's dismissive and it's beneath you. Of course, I wouldn't expect any less from you guys over there at the Gray Lady, but you get my point. The folks at the Free Press are just as much journalists as you are. Don't be dismissive of them. Okay. So Yuri Berliner, who's a 25-year man at NPR, writes an article in thefreepress.com and takes his employer to task. So let's get into this. Headline. I've been at NPR for 25 years. Here's how we lost America's trust. Yuri Berliner, a veteran at the Public Radio's institution, says the network lost its way when it started telling listeners how to think. Oh, I'm loving this article already. And this is the first line out of Yuri Berliner's essay. You know the stereotype of the NPR listener? The EV driving, Wordle playing, tote bag carrying coastal elite? It doesn't precisely describe me, but it's not far off. I'm a Sarah Lawrence educated, raised by a lesbian peace activist mother. I drive a Subaru, and Spotify says my listening habits are most similar to people in Berkeley. I fit the NPR mode. I'll cop to that. So when I got a job here at NPR 25 years ago, I never looked back. As a senior editor of the business desk, where news is always breaking, we've covered upheavals in the workplace, supermarket prices, social media, and artificial intelligence. It's true NPR has always had a liberal bent, but during most of my tenure here, an open-minded, curious culture prevailed. We were nerdy, but not knee-jerk, activist, or scolding. In recent years, however, that has changed. Today, those who listen to NPR or read its coverage online find something different: the distilled worldview of a very small segment of the U.S. population. If you're a conservative, you will read this and say, duh, it's always been this way. but it hasn't. For decades, since its founding in 1970, a wide swath of America tuned into NPR for reliable journalism and gorgeous audio pieces with birds singing in the Amazon. Millions came to us for conversations that exposed us to voices around the country and the world radically different from our own, engaging precisely because they were unguarded and unpredictable. No image generated more pride within NPR than the farmer listening to Morning Edition from his or her tractor at sunrise. Back in 2011, although NPR's audience tilted a bit to the left, it still bore a resemblance to America at large. 26% of listeners describe themselves as conservative, 23% middle of the road, and 37% as liberal. In 2023, the picture was completely different. Only 11% describe themselves as very or somewhat conservative, 21% middle of the road, and 67% of listeners said they were very or somewhat liberal. We weren't just losing conservatives, we were also losing moderates and traditional liberals. An open-minded spirit now listen to this. An open-minded spirit no longer exists within NPR. And now, predictably, we don't have an audience that reflects America. That wouldn't have been a problem for an openly polemical news outlet serving a niche audience. But for NPR, which purports to consider all things, it's devastating both for its journalism and its business model. And now you begin to understand why it is Yuri Berliner's article is just absolutely making waves inside the liberal journalism community. This sort of thing is not supposed to happen. Okay? This is basically the equivalent, and I'm going to use an analogy that's not perfect, but you're going to understand where I'm going with this. This is the equivalent of right in the middle of the church service, when the pastor's getting up and giving the sermon, somebody in the choir stands up, rips off their robes, and starts spewing every form of heresy and blasphemy that you could possibly imagine. Okay? This sort of thing is not supposed to happen inside liberal journalism. I mean, conservatives taking a shot at a liberal news outlet is one thing. A self-described liberal getting up in everybody's grill about this is not supposed to happen. Okay? This is big. Now, I made the joke earlier in other news, headline, water is wet. Yeah, for most people like me and other conservatives, we're going to sit, and he's right. He even says it. He's like, yeah, for most of you guys who are conservative, going to read this essay, you're going to say, duh. Okay, yeah, he's right. Duh. Yeah, of course NPR has a liberal bent. Okay? But, you know, and I'll be honest, I'm a conservative. There's some stuff in NPR I can listen to and tolerate. You know, there was a time, and I don't think it was that long ago, they actually had good news coverage. Okay? I'm not going to sit there and totally bash him over the head, but I think Berliner is I think he's onto something here. You know, let's see what you guys are saying in the chat. What do you got on all this? NPR is like fascist communal radio, but everyone thinks it's hippy dippy news and joy. Well, okay, I can sort of see that. Is quality across the industry. That writer that dissed the AP sounds like chopping. Could be. What else have we got? Taibbi has an example from today's NPR covering the lack of Plan B pills in Ukraine. Instead, why do so many Ukraine? Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good example. Good example. You know. Okay. All right. I'm not gonna sit here and bash you for it. Absolutely not. But like I said, what Yuri Berliner did with this essay is not supposed to happen. You know, the pastor, the choir, the piano player, the organ player, everybody's supposed to be on the same page, and now you got somebody that got up in the middle of a liberal church service and spewed heresy. I'm not going to say he has a target on his head, but man, he's not going to get invited to the next cocktail party at somebody's house, let me tell you. So let's see what else he's got to say, because this essay, first of all, is very well written. I mean, and I'm not just saying that, because I necessarily agree with this. It's a very well written essay. I recommend it to you. You can find it out on thefp.com, thefreepress.com. It's a fabulous essay. It's very well written, and good writing always gets my eye. Going back to Berliner's essay, like many unfortunate things, the rise of advocacy took off with Donald Trump. As in many newsrooms, his election in 2016 was greeted at NPR with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and despair. Just to note, I eagerly voted against Trump twice, but felt we were obligated to cover him fairly. But what began as tough, straightforward coverage of a belligerent, truth-impaired president veered toward efforts to damage or topple the Trump presidency. Persistent rumors that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia over the election became the catnip that drove reporting. At NPR, we hitched our wagon to Trump's most visible antagonist, Representative Adam Schiff. Schiff, who was the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, became NPR's guiding hand, its ever-present muse. By my count, NPR interviewed Schiff 25 times about Trump and Russia. During many of those conversations, Schiff alluded to purported evidence of collusion. The Schiff talking points became the drumbeat of NPR news reports. But when the Mueller report found no credible evidence of collusion, NPR's coverage was noticeably sparse. Russiagate quietly faded from our programming. It is one thing to swing and miss on a major story. Unfortunately, it happens. You follow the wrong leads, you get misled by sources you trusted, you're emotionally invested in the narrative, and bits of circumstantial evidence never add up. It's bad to blow a big story. But it's worse to pretend it never happened, to move on with no mea culpas, no self-reflection, especially when you expect high standards of transparency from public figures and institutions, but don't practice those standards yourself. That's what shatters trust and engenders cynicism among the media. Russiagate was not NPR's only miscue. I want to stop here for a second, because Yuri Berliner brings up something, and I've got an example from history when the press actually cared enough to try to correct a story that they ran with. Okay. I think it was the early 1980s. I forget the exact year. And there was a young reporter at the Washington Post. Some of y'all may remember this story, who wrote a series of articles, and they were commonly called Jesse. And they talked about a 6-year-old African-American kid in inner city Washington, D.C., who was already hooked on heroin. And the author of the articles wrote many, many pieces, and it was acclaimed as critical, hard-hitting journalism, shining a spotlight on a very, underreported, sensitive issue. And she got rave reviews for all these stories that she wrote. And the Washington Post, she won a Pulitzer. The Washington Post won a Pulitzer. It looked like just one more feather in the cap for Ben Bradley, the legendary editor of the Washington Post. But a problem began to develop. And that is when senior reporters and senior editors at the Washington Post began to dig into this story. They started finding out that certain aspects of the story weren't adding up factually. Well, the more they kept digging, the more that the senior leadership at the Washington Post came to a very nasty conclusion. A nasty, truthful conclusion. And that was everything. The whole Jesse story was made up out of whole cloth. It never happened. Or it most certainly, at a minimum, didn't happen the way this lady was writing it up in the Washington Post. Now, keep in mind, this was the Washington Post. This was the Washington Post of the Pentagon Papers. This was the Washington Post of Woodward and Bernstein. This was the Washington Post of Watergate. Okay? In the pantheon of journalism, the Post was like Mount Olympus. And Ben Bradley, its editor, might have been viewed as Zeus. Although, I don't know that he was throwing lightning bolts around at anybody, but that's the other side. But you get my point. When Bradley realized what had happened, he got together with the ownership of the Post, and they published a story of correction. Now, this wasn't buried back on page 19 of the C section of the Washington Post. No, this was front page, inside page of the newspaper, column after column after column after column of newspaper area, apologizing for how they got it wrong, explaining how they got it wrong, and telling the readers of the Washington Post, we screwed up. This one's on us. We were wrong. We're coming to you and telling you we blew it. And here's how we're going to correct this to make sure, hopefully, it doesn't happen again. I won't say that was the last time I remember a major news organization doing something like that, but it's probably the best example of how you handle something like that. And I can also safely say I really don't remember anybody else off the top of my head doing anything quite like that. And the only reason that I know about it, confessionally, I've read about the account of what happened. Now, let me ask you guys a question. And I already know how you're going to answer this. Russiagate. Weapons of mass destruction. I mean, name the major news story over the past 25 years that the mainstream media, the Duke lacrosse players, I mean, name a major story over the past 25 years. Can you think of any major news organization that has done anything similar to what the Washington Post did in the early 1980s with the Jesse story? I will almost guarantee I can answer the question for you. You probably haven't. Okay? And this is why I appreciate Yuri Berliner's point. Let me find it here again. It's one thing to swing and miss on a major story, but it's worse to pretend it never happened, to move on with no mea culpas, no self-reflection, especially when you consider high standards of transparency from public figures and institutions and you don't practice them yourselves. That's what shatters trust and engenders cynicism about the media. Another great example. Another great example. And Berliner is absolutely right. And I'll prove his point here in just a minute. I want to go to a couple other things about this article. He goes on to list a couple of other examples. Now, there's one of them that I really want to read here, because he lists about 3 or 4 examples of things that NPR has covered in the past 4 years. And it's amazing to me. Here's the one I'm looking for. In October 2020, the New York Post published the explosive report about the laptop Hunter Biden abandoned at a Delaware computer shop containing emails about his sordid business dealings. With the election only weeks away, NPR turned a blind eye. Here's how NPR's managing editor for the news explained his thinking. Quote, We don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. And we don't want to waste our listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions. But it wasn't a pure distraction or the product of Russian disinformation, as dozens of former and current intelligence officials suggested. The laptop did belong to Hunter Biden. Its contents revealed his connection to the corrupt world of multi-million-dollar influence peddling and its possible implications for its father. The laptop was newsworthy, but the timeless journalistic instinct of following a hot lead story was squelched. During a meeting with my colleagues, I listened to one of NPR's best and most fair-minded journalists said it was good we weren't following the laptop story because it could help Trump. Oh my gosh. I mean, have we all suspected what he just said? Of course we have. Instinctively, do we know or have we known he's right? Absolutely. Now you've got somebody on the inside who is absolutely ripping off the veil and saying, yep, here it is. Take a look. We didn't cover this story because it was going to be good for Trump. Now, you can hate Trump, you can like Trump, you can whatever. We're talking about journalistic ethics here, folks. You've got a group of people that freely admit we're not going to cover this story because it's good for Trump. And Yuri Berliner just blew the whole thing up. Under normal circumstances, they'd say that stuff behind closed doors. We're not going to do this because it's good for Trump. Don't tell anybody. Yuri Berliner's like, screw that. Here, let the whole world see what you're doing. Now it's after the fact, and the country has suffered a considerable harm. But now you've got somebody on the inside finally admitting it, and the reaction that he's getting is fascinating. We're going to get to that in a minute. I want to go to the last part of his essay, and I'm going to read this in its entirety. I'll break it up as I need to. I'm offering 3 examples of widely followed stories where I believe we faltered. NPR's coverage is out there in the public domain. Anyone can read or listen for themselves and make up their own judgment. But to truly understand how independent journalism suffered at NPR, you need to step inside the organization. You need to start with former CEO John Lansing. Lansing came to NPR in 2019 from the federally funded agency that oversees Voice of America. Like others who have served in the top job at NPR, he was primarily hired to raise money and ensure good working relations with the hundreds of member stations that acquire NPR's programming. After working mostly behind the scenes, Lansing became more visible and forceful a figure after the killing of George Floyd in May of 2020. It was an anguished time in the newsroom, personally and professionally, so for NPR staffers. Floyd's murder, captured on video, changed both the conversation and the daily operations at NPR. Given the circumstances of Floyd's death, it would have been an ideal moment to tackle difficult questions. Is America, as progressive activists claim, beset by systemic racism in the 2020s in law enforcement, education, housing, and elsewhere? We happen to have a very powerful tool for answering such questions: journalism. Journalism that lets evidence lead the way. But the message from the top was very different. America's infestation with systemic racism was declared loud and clear. It was a given. Our mission was to change it. When it comes to identifying and ending systemic racism, Lansing wrote in a company-wide article, we can be agents of change. Listening and deep reflection are necessary, but not enough. They must be followed by constructive and meaningful steps forward. I hold myself accountable for this. And we were told that NPR itself was part of the problem. In confessional language, he said the leaders of public media, quote, starting with me, must be aware of how we ourselves have benefited from white privilege in our careers. We must understand the unconscious bias we bring to our work and our interactions, and we must commit ourselves, body and soul, to profound changes in ourselves and our institutions. Lansing declared that diversity of our staff and our audience was the overriding mission, the North Star of the organization. Phrases like part of the North Star became part of meetings and more casual conversations. Race and identity became paramount in nearly every aspect of the workplace. Journalists at NPR were required to ask everyone we interviewed their race, their gender, and their ethnicity, among other questions. and had to enter it in a centralized tracking system. Ooh, that sounds positively Orwellian. We were given unconscious bias training sessions. Oh, good. A growing DEI staff offered regular meetings imploring us to, quote, start talking about race. Monthly dialogues were offered for women of color and men of color. Non-binary people of color were included too. These initiatives, bolstered by a $1 million grant from the NPR Foundation, came from management from the top down. Crucially, they were in sync culturally with what was happening at the grassroots. Among producers, reporters, and other staffers, most visible was a burgeoning number of employee resource groups based on identity. They included MIGIPOC. Huh? What? Marginalized genders and intersex people of color mentorship program. What? Huh? MIGIPOC. Marginalized genders and intersex people of color. Magente, a Latino employees NPR, NPR Noir, Black employees NPR, Southwest Asians and Northern America. Well, for heaven's sake. UMA, Muslim identifying employees, women, gender expansive, and transgender people of technology. Oh my goodness. This is crazy. We go on. All of this reflected a broader movement in the culture of people clustering together based on ideology or a characteristic of birth. If, as NPR's internal website suggested, the groups were simply a great way to meet like-minded colleagues and help new employees feel included, it would have been one thing. But the role and standing of affinity groups, including those outside NPR, were more than that. They became a priority for NPR's union, SAG-AFTRA, an item in collective bargaining. The current contract in the section on DEI requires NPR management to keep up to date the current language and style guidance from journalism affinity groups and inform employees if language differs from the diktats of those groups. In such case, the dispute could go on before the DEI Accountability Committee. In essence, this means the NPR union, of which I'm a dues-paying member, has ensured that advocacy groups are given a seat at the table in determining the terms and the vocabulary of news coverage. That is huge. Conflicts between workers and bosses, between labor and management, are common in workplaces. NPR has had its share, but what's noticeable is the extent to which people at every level of NPR have comfortably coalesced around the progressive worldview. And this, I believe, is the most damaging development at NPR, the absence of viewpoint diversity. Folks, I'm gonna drop the link for this in chat. And I highly recommend, I really do, go read this, at your leisure. But this is probably one of the most extraordinary. Let me get this thing put over on Rumble as well. Give me 1 second here, folks. Just an amazing piece. And like I say, I hope it's been entertaining as we go through this. But man, you talk about ripping the veil off. That is exactly what Yuri Berliner has done here. This is absolutely extraordinary. It really is. It's like I say, it's a very well written piece, and just amazing to me that he wrote this. Now, give me 1 second here because I've almost got this thing into Rumble, and then I want to ask you guys a question. There we go. Let me ask you guys a question. No, I'm not trying to give you an aneurysm reading this article. Hello, good night. But if you got one, I wouldn't be shocked. And thank you, sir. I genuinely appreciate that little contribution to the tin cup. I have a question for you guys. Why is Yuri Berliner having to publish this at someplace other than NPR? Yeah, let me ask that question again. Why is he having to publish this at someplace other than NPR? Because to me, well, and I know where you're going with this, but you're almost answering my question for me. I have a question for the current leadership at NPR, all the way from the CEO on down. All you editors and all you news people, here's my question to you. Doesn't it prove the point that NPR is now absent of what Berliner calls viewpoint diversity? That he had to take an essay outside of NPR, a place that he has worked at for 25 years. Okay? Why is he having to take a legitimate criticism of the organization outside of the organization to get the organization to look at itself? Why was this not published on NPR's own website? Why was this not read as a radio essay on your news programming or your opinion? No, okay, let's take it out of the news. Just say your opinion programming. Okay. And Zippy, I just saw your comment. We're coming to it. We're coming to it. Wait, don't tell me. Yeah. The fact that he had to go to Barry Weiss's freepress.com to get this published ought to be all the proof that anybody needs that there is a serious problem at NPR. Now, as he says at the beginning of the article, and I'll repeat it here, for folks like us who are of a right-leaning bend ideologically, the fact that, somebody from NPR is saying this, hey, I think NPR has really gone far left, we're all sitting there going, in your point, okay, yeah, I get it. But to the normie out there that's kind of looking at this whole thing going, I hadn't really noticed that, but daggone if he's not right. And to me, and again, this is just me speculating, and you got chime in on this by all means. To me, this is just one more piece of evidence that people are waking up. Now, granted, Yuri Berliner will tell you, hey, I'm a lefty, self-described, lefty, listen to, all the things that, make a lefty, I remember the late G. Gordon Liddy used to describe Lanny Davis as a liberal's liberal. Well, okay, maybe Yuri Berliner is a liberal's liberal, okay? But my point is this. You've got somebody, a self-admitted card-carrying liberal, telling the world, hey man, this organization I'm working for, we got some serious problems. And you'll notice when it starts, in his opinion, it starts around 2020 with the death of George Floyd, and the reaction inside NPR to that happening. In his mind, it went from being a news organization to an advocacy organization. And you can't really argue with his evidence. Gordon Liddy used to call it a liberal's liberal. Well, a moron's moron. Oh God. Yeah, I mean, why couldn't he publish it there? And Zippy, I'm going to put your comment up here. It goes against DEI and EGS rules. Facts are not conclusive to artificial diversity. Zippy, you ain't wrong. Yeah. That piece that he wrote is probably one of the best critical thinking pieces that I've seen in quite a while. I mean, look, you can agree with him, disagree with him, whatever. but it does a service. Now, here's the part that cracks you up. Okay. Two things. Why did he go to the Free Press? I want to show you something from the Free Press's own website. Check this out. The Free Press is a new media company founded by Barry Weiss, who used to be at the New York Times, by the way, and built on the ideals that were once the bedrock of great journalism: honesty, doggedness, fierce independence. We publish investigative stories and provocative commentary about the world as it actually is, with the quality once expected from the legacy press, but the fearlessness of the new. Originally called Common Sense, we focus on stories that are ignored or misconstrued in the service of an ideological narrative. For us, curiosity isn't a liability, it's a necessity. Expect debates, scoops from trusted reporters, provocations from thinking outside the lines, and live events that bring people with different views together into a truly diverse community. You won't agree with everything we run, and we think that's exactly the point: a free press for the free people. That, ladies and gentlemen, that. I'm trying to figure out which way I need to point here. Here we go. No, that one. That, ladies and gentlemen, that right there is why. That right there is why Yuri Berliner published at the Free Press, and he couldn't do it inside of an organization that he'd been a part of for 25 years. Now, what was NPR's reaction to this? You're not going to be surprised. You're not going to be surprised at all. New NPR CEO responds to editor's claims it lost America's trust. Article by Tara Suter. We read the following. This was from yesterday. NPR's new CEO denounced claims from a senior editor that the outlet has lost America's trust, calling the comments made in an op-ed disrespectful and hurtful. Catherine Mayer explained in a message to employees Friday that the editor, Yuri Berliner, called the outlet's mission into question in two ways: critiquing the quality and integrity of the editorial process and criticizing who we are. Quote, asking a question about whether we're living up to our mission should always be fair game. After all, journalism is nothing if not hard questions. Questioning whether our people are serving our mission with integrity based on little more than the recognition of their identity is profoundly disrespectful. That's not what he did. That is not what he did, Ms. Mayer. Catherine, that is not what he did at all. I'll go back to the piece, okay? But the message from the top was clear. America's infestation with racism was declared loud and clear. It was a given. Our mission was to change it. And that's the problem. NPR stopped being a news organization, and it started being an advocacy group for changing what it felt things were wrong in America, particularly on the questions of race and diversity. And what was a liberal bent at that point became a liberal bedrock foundation for everything that went forward in terms of news reporting and news organization. Okay? No one's questioning who you are. Okay? It is not profoundly disrespectful, hurtful, or demeaning. You don't even have the intellectual honesty to look in the mirror and say to yourself, is he right? No, you attacked who we are. Questioning whether our people are serving our mission with integrity based on little more than the recognition of their identity is He didn't bring up identity. He didn't bring up identity. What does identity have to do with your ability to report the news? Catherine? What does the ability to report the news have to do with identity? That's what he's calling you out on. He's calling you out on the fact that you became more about advocacy and more about trying to change things in the world as opposed to saying, here's what the news is. Go back to the statement of the free press, and I'll read it again. The free press is a media company built on the ideals that were once bedrock in great journalism: honesty, doggedness, and fierce independence. We publish stories and commentary about the world as it actually is, with the quality once expected from the legacy press and the fearlessness of the new. That's what journalism is. You report the world as it is. Are there things about it you might like to change? Sure. Do that in your own private time. But when you pick up the pen and the paper, or you sit down in front of the computer, you report the world as it is, not how you think it ought to be, not how you would like to see it, not anything else. You report it as it is. Yuri Berliner, Catherine, did you guys a service, but you're too stubborn and too ideologically blind to realize the favor he did you. And instead of taking a deep look into your souls, journalistically speaking, you're going to sit there and try and crucify this guy. And Gypsy, I think you're, yeah, he's going to be, yeah. Oh, poor old Yuri's off to the education camp. Oh, we have problem with friend here. He needs to be re-educated about how the world works. Yeah. How dare he speak against yeah, exactly. 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 You know. You know. I mean, it just it boggles my mind. I mean, look, you can not like him, you can like him, you can whatever, but he did the work. He did his news organization a service. But you know what's going to happen? The same thing that's always been happening for the past 25, 30 years. I mean, I love the way Selena Zito puts it. The legendary journalist from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Did Catherine Maurer, and this is from her tweet, did she ever once consider, talking about Catherine Maurer, the editor-in-chief at NPR, did Catherine Maurer ever once consider that the people who live 15 minutes outside of large metropolitan cities feel the way NPR covers them or questions their beliefs and their value systems is profoundly disrespectful, hurtful, and demeaning to them? Selena, there you go, girl. Right on. NPR is being called out by one of their own, and they're sitting around, oh, boo-hoo, I can't believe you're being mean to us. I can't believe you're being disrespectful to us and hurtful. And Selena Zito's looking back at NPR going, hey, you ever given a thought to the fact that people who live about 15 minutes outside of where you guys are at, they consider it mean, hurtful, and disrespectful the way you talk about them? Selena Zito's absolutely right. She is absolutely spot on with this. Zippy over on Rumble, and thank you for the Rumble rant, by the way. I genuinely appreciate it. Artificial diversity, it's low-effort social engineering. It's the bigotry of low expectations. Few understand the Nazi horrors of DEI, EGS, affirmative action. Artificial diversity is neo-slavery. Dude, you ain't wrong. You ain't wrong at all. Good night. You might be right. You might be absolutely right, brother. You just might. Just saying. Yeah, and another point that's perfectly valid, they cannot take criticism. They can't. So, yeah, and to me, this is just an amazing, amazing topic. And it's just an amazing, I wonder, and I wonder if there are other people inside major news organizations, ABC, CBS, and you saw Catherine Herridge this week. Which will, I mean, I haven't got anything pulled up about it, but since it was up in Connecticut who brought this up, that if there are other people inside major news organizations who feel much like Yuri Berliner, and what he did is going to give them the courage to speak out too. And keep in mind, like I've said throughout this whole discussion, Yuri Berliner is a self-admitted liberal. Okay. I think what he did showed a lot of guts. You know. Hang on a second. I got to jot myself a note here. Over on Rumble, Zippy, again, thank you for the Rumble rant. I appreciate it. What gets me, why can they not understand what they are doing is the same as systems of kings and nobles and a caste system? That is a great point. That is an absolutely great point. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, very good point. Morning, Brent's over on Rumble says, "Sup? Good morning, sir. Dude, I hope you have been listening to this discussion about Yuri Berliner because, man, I got a feeling this is right up your and Daniel's alley. Matter of fact, I'll if I can think of it to do it and get time, I'll clip this section and I'll send it to you if you haven't seen the whole thing yet, because this is one of those discussions that needs to happen. I'll do my best to send it to you because I think you of all people I know would enjoy it because this goes right up your alley, brother. But yeah, we're glad to have you here this morning. Absolutely glad. But yeah, thank you, Zippy, again for the Rumble rant. I greatly appreciate it. Yeah, no good deed goes unpunished. But I'm wondering, I really am. I'm wondering if what Yuri did with this piece at Free Press, if this is going to get people inside places like ABC, NBC, CNN, and others who might be themselves liberal, much like Yuri Berliner, if this is going to give them the courage to come forward and start talking about this. Because what Catherine Herridge, and this is the comment that Up in Connecticut put out there, what Catherine Herridge testified before Congress this week, submitting stories that were critical of people and they're quashed. This kind of thing has to change. I'm not saying there needs to be laws that mandate you must publish this story and you must publish that story. No, I don't want the Congress now or at any time telling the press what to write. But there's got to be inside these organizations that purport themselves to be journalistic, have journalistic integrity, there has got to be some kind of freedom of the press and freedom of speech. So, yeah. So anyway, I tell you what, and again, Brent, if I can think to do it, I will forward this thing out to you. I will forward it out to you because this is a really, really pretty good discussion, I think, anyway. But it's about 11:55 on Saturday morning. My name is Brian Trimpin. I'm the Front Porch Conservative. We are on YouTube. We're on Rumble. We are on Twitter. So if you haven't done it yet, send out a tweet, a Gettr, a Gab. Tell your friends to come on in. I want to thank everybody who's here this morning. This is just an absolutely fabulous conversation. I've always said I've got the smartest audience on the internet, and I truly do believe that. I love the interaction with you guys. You guys absolutely get my juices going. I really do. I love every last one of you. You guys are the best audience I could ever ask for. Now all we got to do is get about 10 more like you. Just grow this sucker. And it'll happen. It'll happen. But everything you guys are doing, the tweets, the mentions on social media, inviting your friends, everything you guys are doing is most certainly greatly appreciated. And from the bottom of my heart, I love you guys. I really do mean that. All right, let us shift gears to some really depressing topics. And, apparently, we are on the verge of World War III, or at least this is what Biden thinks. I don't know if you guys have seen this or not, but on Friday, this is an article from Politico, Biden warns that Iran could attack Israel soon. The president said his grim outlook was based on intelligence reports that he was not at liberty to describe further. Oh, now, see. This is when I start getting nervous. When a politician says, well, I know something, but I can't tell you what I know, then why'd you even say it? Why did you even say it? But let's get into this. Article written by Eli Stokels, Nahal Tusi, and Aaron Banco. I tell you what, the folks over at Politico have the coolest sounding names. I'll tell you what. Anyway, President Joe Biden on Friday said he expected Iran to attack Israel, quote, sooner rather than later, delivering a pessimistic assessment, even as he warned Tehran against taking such action. Answering questions from reporters after delivering remarks to a convention of civil rights leaders, Biden said his grim outlook was based on intelligence reports he was not at liberty to describe further. Asked what he would say to Iran about a potential attack, Biden was terse. Don't. Oh, now that I'm quaking in my boots, folks. Quaking in my boots. Yeah. Expectations for a retaliatory attack have risen in the days since an Israeli strike on an Iranian embassy in Syria killed a number of senior commanders on April the 1st. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, had said that Israel, quote, must be punished for the embassy attack, though Iran has not claimed responsibility for it. The United States has begun restricting travel in Israel amid growing fears of an attack either by Iran or its proxies. Biden vowed that the U.S. would continue to defend Israel from any attacks, even as he upped his criticism of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's handling of the war in Gaza. We are devoted to the defense of Israel, Biden said. We will support Israel and help defend Israel, and Iran will not succeed. Okay, let's get into this. I am not going to lie to you, my audience. I am very worried about where the U.S. is going in all of this. And the worry is this. There are some who will argue that the U.S. does not want to get into a war with Iran. And when I say they argue the U.S. does not want to get into a war with Iran, in other words, instinctively they know this is a bad idea. And I'm going to play you a clip here from a very famous thinker on this subject that is pretty provocative. And I'm putting it out here for your consideration. I'm not saying I'm necessarily, denying what he's saying, agreeing with what he's saying, but I'm putting it out there for consumption. There are folks that know getting into a war with Iran is a really bad idea. My worry is, given who the president is right now and the people he's got surrounding him, that we're going to get sucked into it regardless, which is why, perhaps naively and perhaps in a very old-fashioned manner, I always try to make sure that the U.S. does not go sticking its nose into stuff going on around the world. Now, some people call that isolation or isolationism. I don't call it that because that's not what it is. I'm not saying ignore what's going on in the world. I mean, obviously, take steps, prepare, do what you need to do. But by the same token, just because you prepare, take steps, and you know what's going on in the world doesn't mean you need to go get involved in it. That's not isolationism. That's just prudence. Exactly. Take care of our own first. I get exactly what you're saying. It pisses me off to no end when people like Mitch McConnell, that calcified dinosaur, is sitting around saying, well, in my remaining time in the Senate, rah, 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 I'm going to fight against isolationism. Who's being isolationist? No one's saying stick your head in the sand and ignore everything going on in the world. We're saying prepare, be aware of it, but don't go getting involved in it. Yep. Totally avoidable. Absolutely avoidable. That's what makes me very nervous about this. I think instinctively, on some level, that Joe Biden knows in what parts of his brain are still functioning at this stage. I think he knows getting into a war with Iran is a very bad idea. Oh, and I saw it, Zippy. I'm coming to that. There's Rumble rant. When is the U.S. not, quote, helping Iran and terrorists to fight or annoy Israel or other states? Good question. And thank you for the Rumble rant. I appreciate it. I think somewhere in Joe Biden's brain that still works, he knows getting into a war with Iran is not a good idea. I don't think he has the will or the willpower to stop forces inside his own government from possibly taking us there. And that brings us to a clip, an exchange between Glenn Greenwald and the legendary Professor John Mearsheimer. And if you don't follow Mearsheimer, I really recommend him to you. Oh yeah, and Brent, I saw that Iran hijacked an Israeli boat earlier today. We're coming to that. That was after, hit an Iranian. We'll get to that. Hang on, I'm coming to it. But I want to play you this clip from Mearsheimer. And as I say, this thing's pretty provocative. You may agree with him, you may disagree with him, but I'll let you hear his take on it because I think this is really interesting. This is from about a few days ago on Glenn Greenwald's program on Rumble called System Update. Folks, do me a favor and check out this exchange.
What are the kinds of things that Iran could do or might do in order to retaliate, something it seems like they almost have to do, and what are the possible implications of that for the United States?
Well, the fact is that the Iranians don't want a war with the United States. They've been trying to avoid a war with the United States. They've gone to great lengths to communicate to us that they don't want a war. And of course, we don't want a war with them either. When we first put those 2 aircraft carriers and the other naval ships into the Mediterranean Sea, it was not so much to protect Israel. I mean, there was some of that at play, but it was mainly to make sure that the war didn't escalate and we didn't get dragged in. We don't want to get dragged into any wars in the Middle East. We're already fighting the Houthis. That's bad enough. But we don't want a war against Hezbollah, and we certainly don't want a war against Iran. And I think what's going on here, as I alluded to before, is I think the Israelis would like to get us into a war with Iran. And I don't think the Israelis would mind it at all if they got into a war with Hezbollah. And in fact, in the early months of the war, there was lots of evidence, at least in the newspapers, that the United States was telling the Israelis that they could not start a war with Hezbollah because there was evidence the Israelis actually wanted to go to war with Hezbollah. They wanted to deal with that problem militarily. As you well know, the Israelis believe in big stick diplomacy. They believe that they can beat other groups or other countries over the head with a big stick and get their way. It hardly ever works, but that's their sort of modus operandi. And I think they wanted to pick a fight for a number of months there with Hezbollah, not only to punish Hezbollah, but I think they also saw as an opportunity to do ethnic cleansing on the West Bank. I think the Israeli view deep down is that the bigger the war is, the greater the opportunity for ethnic cleansing, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. And as you know, that's their ultimate objective, to cleanse the Palestinians out of both of those 2 pieces of real estate.
Okay, let's get into this. Now, like I say, you can agree with Mearsheimer, you can disagree with him. I put this out here for consumption. I think his point is valid, is that the sides don't want this war. Now, I'm not so sure I agree with him about Iran's motives in this, but okay, I'm willing to hear him out. I think absolutely there are people inside the U.S. that do not want to see this happen. Okay. And the Israelis' motives are the Israelis' motives. Again, I'm not necessarily saying I agree with Mearsheimer or disagree with him, but I think his point is valid. Nobody's wanting this. We might be getting sucked into it, and I pray we don't. And I pray I'm wrong. I pray we don't get into this. This is just a disaster waiting to happen. Truly. So yeah, this is absolutely frightening where we're going here. But I want to bring up, because Brent over on Rumble from Dangerous Rhetoric, which, by the way, do me a favor, if you're watching this and you're not following my good friends over at the Dangerous Rhetoric podcast, go check them out. They are on Rumble. You can find them on YouTube. You can find them on Twitter. Absolutely great guys. And they do a fabulous job discussing the issues. But Brentley was pointing out something that happened just this morning in the early hours over in the Persian Gulf. And here's the article. Iran's Revolutionary Guard seizes a container ship near the Straits of Hormuz amid tensions with Israel. Article written by John Grambrell. Commandos from Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard rappelled down from a helicopter onto an Israeli-affiliated container ship near the Straits of Hormuz and seized the vessel Saturday, the latest in a series of attacks between the two countries. The Middle East had braced for potential Iranian retaliation over a suspected Israeli strike earlier this month on an Iranian consular building in Syria that killed 12 people, including a senior guard general who once commanded its expeditionary Quds forces there. The Israeli war on Hamas, Freudian slip maybe, I don't know, in the Gaza Strip, meanwhile, is now 6 months old and is inflaming decades-old tensions across the whole region. With Iranian-backed forces like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Yemen's Houthi rebels also involved in the fighting, any new attack in the Middle East threatens to escalate that conflict into a wider regional war. And I want to show you a video image. This runs about 12 seconds, and you may or may not be able to see this. I'll try and enlarge it even more if I can. Okay. That's about as large as I can make it. But what you're going to see, there's a rope right here, and you will see. Hang on. Here we go. There's somebody rappelling down. Here comes somebody else rappelling. Watch this. Here comes somebody else. Yeah, here are the commandos just rappelling down onto the ship. I get very, very nervous about this whole thing. Very frightened. So, folks, just keep your eyes open. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, I've never rappelled before, but I've heard it can be a lot of fun. Not necessarily my idea of a good time, but I get it. Oh, goodness. So yeah, a lot to be worried about in the world. A whole lot. Well, I'll tell you what, it's about 10 minutes after 12. Let us switch gears, and we'll get into some Hodgepodge items. Now, for those of you who've never been on Front Porch Brunch before, you've never stopped by, first of all, what's the matter with you? Second of all, we break this show up into a couple of different sections. And one of them that I call Hodgepodge Stew. Hodgepodge Stew is, or I should say, are those news stories that aren't quite above the fold, so to speak. They're not the top headline stuff, but they are things that are going on that I think are worth noting. Some of them are serious, some of them are silly, some of them are anywhere in between. Yeah, my gears are being switched, and that's absolutely what's the matter with me. But one of the stories I want to talk about is this ongoing backlash at Donald Trump over his position on abortion. And basically, if you're not familiar with the story, basically what happened was this. Donald Trump came out earlier this week and said, look, on the question of abortion, it should be left to the states. In other words, let the states sort this out. He said, look, you're going to have some states that are very conservative on the question of abortion. You're going to have some states very liberal on the question of abortion. You're going to have everywhere in between. He said, but in the end, the people, through their elected state legislatures, ought to decide this question. And over on Rumble, Brent says it's a great position because it pisses everybody off. Well, I don't know if he's trying to piss everybody off, but look, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Constitutionally speaking, the best thing that ever came out of the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe was the fact that it takes it out of the hands of the federal judiciary, who's unelected and unaccountable, and puts the question back in the hands of the people of each individual state, and they can make the decision for themselves. What do they want to do? As frankly, it should be with most, if not all, issues that are not expressly federal. Translation, 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution. Any power not specifically granted to the federal government is reserved, therefore, unto the states. Let's settle the question of abortion in the state legislatures. And that's what's happening all around the country. But the irony of the criticism that Donald Trump is getting is that it's not really coming from the left, although you've got people like Katie Hobbs and, Kamala Harris, who we lovingly refer to as Vice President Idaho. Idaho's out there. She's like, oh, women are being denied abortions and this is going to endanger women's health. Idaho's out there. She's just all about that. Okay. But the biggest portion of the criticism coming at Donald Trump is from the national pro-life movement. Check this out. This was an article came out in Politico. Conservatives clash with Trump on leaving abortion up to the voters. That's a weird headline to me. Because to me, I thought that's what we conservatives wanted to do. We want to leave not just abortion, but almost any question up to the voters. Isn't that what democracy's all about, you guys over Politico? I thought that's what we're trying to get to here. Well, there's a reason why I call her Idaho. You don't believe, if you don't understand why, go talk to, Willie Brown. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, back to this article. Y'all are going to get me in trouble this morning. Not that it takes a lot to do that, but anyway. The gulf between what Trump said, and what anti-abortion groups want underscores divisions that have dogged conservatives for 2 years. Article by Alice Miranda Olstein. Former President Donald Trump is calling for abortion access to be left to the people of each state, and Republican candidates up and down the ballot are falling in line. But that stance is in direct conflict with conservative lawmakers and activist efforts to keep abortion rights initiatives off state ballots. Their array of tactics includes several bills and ballot measures that would raise the signature gathering or state vote threshold for changing constitutions, lawsuits to block initiatives, bureaucratic maneuvers to insert anti-abortion language, and state-level confrontations to dissuade voters from signing petitions to put abortion on the ballot. The gulf between Trump's "let's leave it to the states" view and the anti-abortion movement effort underscores divisions that have dogged conservatives for 2 years since Roe was overturned. Quote, this near-term utilitarian means to an end political expediency type of stance that many in the Republican Party have taken marginalizes the unborn and undermines the cause of justice, said Jesse Sutherland, the federal policy director of Americans United for Life. We don't get to choose who lives and dies. Human rights for women and the unborn shouldn't be up for a vote. Okay, I take serious offense at this whole utilitarian means to an end, political expediency type of stance that many in the Republican want. No. Jesse, this is the constitutional question. Look, you really want to get down to cases. You really want to get down to cases on this. What this gets down to is two things. One, you don't want to have to fight this at the state level. Not really. The national pro-life movement would much rather have this thing as a national issue because in one sense it's easier to fight. They only got to go to one place to do it, and that's D.C. The other reason they're wanting to keep this thing as a national issue, and I hate to say this, I really hate to say this, money, almighty dollar, mean green, money. And if you don't think I'm right about this, check out what Mike Cernovich is saying. And you can agree with Cernovich, disagree with him, but daggone it, he's got a valid point. Check this out. Kentucky, Kansas, Ohio. If the pro-life movement can't win in Republican states, what is their plan for a federal ban? Do you understand the real game now? Sink Trump, keep collecting nonprofit bucks. Will you fall for this? And one more. Too much money. I've started going through Form 990 and tax returns. The amount of money raised off, quote, pro-life and then handed out to themselves and their friends is eye-popping. Very little is given to pregnancy centers. It's $1 billion business. You want to know one of the reasons why people like Bill Kristol and people who run think tanks in Washington, D.C., and Jonah Goldberg and others were so pissed off with Donald Trump during his first term? Because Donald Trump was getting things done in 2, 3, or 4 years that they had been talking about for decades and raising money off of it. You heard me. I will say that again in a condensed version. Basically, Donald Trump broke up the grift. How many times throughout the 90s or the early 2000s or the 2000 teens did you hear about these conservative think tanks holding conferences or going on cruises to meet so-and-so, such special person, for the Weekly Standard or whatever conservative organization it was, and they're raising money off of it, millions of dollars. But did you notice one thing during that period? For all that fundraising, for all that paper they were writing, for all that everything else, nothing was changing. And then along comes Donald Trump. And depending on what the issue was, in either year 1, year 2, or year 3, or maybe even year 4 of his presidency, stuff's getting done. Now they can all these, never Trumpers can sit there and say all the time, oh, he's boorish, he's rude, he's blowing up the norms and conventions of the presidency. No. What it gets down to is you guys are pissed off that he's taken away your grift. Now, don't get me wrong. There's stuff about Trump that's going to make you crazy. And you sit there and you go, yeah, that's wrong. But let's be honest about it. The guy got stuff done. And again, you supposedly conservative never Trumpers out there, y'all been talking for years about doing this stuff and you haven't got bo diddly done. Now, let's take that question over to the abortion fight. Don't tell me that money is not factoring into this. I mean, I haven't looked at the stuff Cernovich is looking at, but if he's right, and the pro-life movement is raising all these millions and billions of dollars off of this issue, and, people are fat catting off of this to the detriment of the people that money like this ought to be helping, then the pro-life movement has a lot to answer for. Now, we'll see. We'll see where this goes. But yeah, I find it extraordinarily ironic that it's the pro-life movement that's the ones giving him the most hell about all this. And frankly, it's the correct constitutional position. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The state of New York may pass a law on the question of abortion. I may not agree with it morally. I may not agree with it ethically. I may not agree with it medically. But constitutionally, I don't have a leg to stand on. Why? Because the people, through their legislature and their governor, are deciding for themselves how they want to handle this. If my legislature in West Virginia passes a law on abortion and my governor signs it, somebody from New York may not agree with me ethically, medically, or politically, but constitutionally, they ain't got a leg to stand on. And that's the way it ought to be. But it's the pro-lifers that are the ones that are giving Donald Trump the most hell about this. And it cracks me up. Just amazes me. All right, what else do we have? What else? Oh, by the way, by the by, did you guys hear Bill Maher? Did you guys watch Real Time the other night? Bill Maher dropped a comment, and man, he made everybody in his audience just gasp at what he said. Now, let me set this up. He had a guest on his show named Gillian Tett, who's a columnist from the Financial Times. And she said, I can't understand, with everything else going on in the world, why it is this issue is becoming such a thing. And then Bill Maher drops this comment. Ladies and gentlemen, check this out.
None of you believe it's murder. That's why I don't understand the 15-week thing. Or the Trump's plan is, let's leave it to the states. You mean, so killing babies is okay in some states? Like, I can respect the absolutist position. I really can. I scold the left on when they say, oh, you know what? They just hate women. People who aren't pro-life, pro-choice. They don't hate women. They just made that up. They think it's murder. And it kind of is. I'm just okay with that. I am. I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world. I'm sorry, we won't miss you. That's my position on it. What?
It's quite harsh, Bill.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you catch that? I mean, he drops that comment and the audience is like, yeah. I mean, just like, okay, there's 8 billion people in the world. It's murder. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Whoo. Now, do I think he's being totally serious? Of course not. Absolutely amazing. Couple other quick items. E. Jean Carroll is back in the news, by the way. Don't know if you guys saw this or not, but the police recently visited her house. Check this out from NBC News. Police take possession of E. Jean Carroll's unregistered gun after her testimony in the Trump defamation trial. Carroll revealed on the witness stand this year that she had a handgun at home and didn't have a license for it. Article by Catherine Doyle. Police in New York took possession of a gun belonging to writer E. Jean Carroll in February after she said during testimony in her defamation lawsuit against Donald Trump that she had an unlicensed firearm at home, according to a police report obtained by NBC News. The chief of police in Warwick, New York, visited Carroll at her home on February 15th to discuss some open issues, including Carroll's disclosure of the handgun while she was on the witness stand January 17. During the second day of a civil trial, Carroll had told federal court in Lower Manhattan that she kept a standard revolver, 9 chambers, at home with ammunition by my bed. I still do not have a license. John Rader, the reporting officer, said in his report that he offered to secure the weapon at the police station's property for safekeeping. Carol and a member of her security team surrendered the gun a day after Rader visited, and the firearm was being held until Carol receives a New York pistol license, the report said. Carol and an attorney of hers did not immediately respond to requests for comment on Friday. Neither did Rader. Under New York state law, a person could be found guilty of criminal possession if they possess a firearm, such as a pistol, that has not been registered. The felony carries a maximum sentence of 4 years. It was unclear why police waited almost a month to inquire in person about the unregistered gun Carol said she had at her house and whether police are still in possession of it. Okay. There's a new one. Absolutely amazing. Just all right. You know, there are some people that just they boggle the mind, and she's absolutely one of them. One last story, and then we're going to wrap it up. A lot has been made recently of the squatting issue in America, that that people are squatting in property, and property owners are being, in one form or another, crapped on. Well, the problem apparently is not just in America; it's getting overseas. Check this out. From the Argus.com, Chef Gordon Ramsay's $13 million pub is taken over by squatters. Squatters have taken over Gordon Ramsay's pub in London, which is currently up for sale with a guide price of $13 million. A group of at least 6 squatters locked themselves inside the Grade 2 listed York and Albany Hotel and Gastropub, situated just outside Regent's Park, boarding up the windows and putting up a legal warning defending their takeover. Oh my gosh. In photographs taken before the windows had been further boarded up, the squatters could be seen sleeping on a sofa in the bar, surrounded by litter. On Saturday morning, 2 masked squatters wearing black tracksuits and carrying backpacks and carrier bags exited the property, running away from reporters before they could be approached for comment. A notice taped to the door said the group had a right to occupy the venue, which they said was not a residential building, and therefore not subject to the 2012 legislation, which had created a new offense of squatting in a residential building. The piece of paper, signed by the occupiers, said, "Take notice that we occupy this property, and at all times there is at least one person in occupation. That any entry or attempt to enter into these premises without our permission is therefore a criminal offense, as of any of us who is in physical possession is opposed to such entry without our permission. That if you attempt to enter by violence or threatening of violence, we will prosecute you. You may receive a sentence of up to 6 months imprisonment and or a fine of up to $5,000. Mr. Ramsay called the police on Wednesday but was unable to have the squatters removed, it is understood. Another notice asked passersby for food and clothes donations or anything else you no longer want or need. The Metropolitan Police sent a statement, quote, "Police were made aware of squatters at a disused property in Parkway, Regent's Park, Northwest 1 on Wednesday, April 10th. This is a civil matter, and the police did not attend the property." In 2007, film director Gary Love bought the freehold of the former 19th century Coaching Inn. He subsequently leased the property to Mr. Ramsay on a 25-year term with an annual rent of $640,000. The Kitchen Nightmares host unsuccessfully attempted to free himself from the lease in a legal battle at the High Court in 2015. The venue went on sale at the end of last year with a guide price of $13 million. According to government guidance, squatters can apply to become the registered owners of a property if they occupy it continuously for 10 years, acted as owners for the whole of that time, and had not previously been given permission to live there by the owner. Holy cow. All right. So there you go. It's just absolutely amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So yeah, going back to the E. Jean Carroll story. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree at all. You know, just amazing. That's a good question. Zippy, I honestly, I don't know. I do not know on that one. I don't know. Yeah. You get what you deserve. That is faux show. So anyway, that's what I've got this week for brunch. And it's about 12:30. So, for the sake of everybody's Saturday. And by the way, I don't know what the weather's like where you're at, but it is positively gorgeous here in my area. My great nephews have a baseball game later this afternoon. I got some things I've got to get done, so I'm going to have to skedaddle. We will be back next week with. Did I see that last Rumble rant? Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies, Zippy. I apologize. Rumble rant. I'd argue that drugs and abortion are a Bill of Rights issue, but no one cares about liberty. LOL. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't disagree with you. I do not disagree. And thank you again for the Rumble rant. I greatly appreciate that. But yeah, this has been a fun session of brunch, and you guys are awesome. We'll be back this week. Remember, on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m., we're now doing a live stream through the week. I'll be interspersing some videos in between. Please continue to spread the word about the channel. I greatly appreciate all the help you all are giving me. You guys have an absolutely great weekend, and remember the words of that great American philosopher, Tom T. Hall. It is faster horses, younger lovers, older whiskey, more money. You guys have a great weekend, and we'll